Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass, your weekly guide to developing commercial insight that goes beyond just headlines. Each week, we take one major story and break it down to help you progress through three levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced commercial awareness. Whether you're just starting out or already have some understanding, this program is here to help you think like a commercial lawyer. By the end of today's session, you'll have practical insights that you can use in applications and interviews. So today's episode is all about data privacy and compliance. It's an ever-evolving challenge for companies worldwide. With a patchwork of regulations from the EU's GDPR to California's CCPA, there's no simple tick box solution. Data privacy isn't just a legal headache, it's a cornerstone of customer trust, brand reputation, and commercial strategy. So, my name is Daniel Shepherd. I'm a law conversion student and a future trainee solicitor. And today I'm joined by Brendan. How are we doing today, Brendan?
Very well, thanks, Dan. Cheers for the introduction there. As Dan mentioned, we're talking all about data. Before we jump into this topic, a little bit of background on myself. So as Dan said, my name is Brendan Collar. I am a commercial legal counsel at TikTok. I'm recently relocated to Dubai, so based out here in Dubai. Previously, I was at RPC in London, so Reynolds Porter Chamberlain, and I was there for 6 years in their commercial team, and I've worked for a number of companies, both in the retail and tech space, and data is certainly one of those topics that sort of crops up all the time for various clients in different areas. So hopefully it will be an interesting topic for those who are watching today, and we're looking forward to diving in a little bit on this, Dan.
Yeah, I can imagine, obviously, working at TikTok, data is kind of at the forefront of your mind a lot of the time, maybe at some of the headaches.
Indeed. But yeah, we navigate and push on. So all good
100%.
fun.
So, to start off, would you be able to give us a simple overview of what data privacy compliance really means and why it's become such a major issue for companies?
Yeah, of course. So just to basically give you a brief overview, obviously, of data, I think before we get into what it means for a company specifically, just taking a bit of a step back, I think from a personal perspective, we all know what it's like to sort of log onto a website and have a privacy pop up or cookies pop up, and you have to accept or reject or go in, and you're overwhelmed with all the different complexities just on a basic personal level. And that's the same for businesses as well, but even more in depth. But there are rules and regulations around data and the use of it for certain reasons. And companies that collect and use consumers' data and information have to do so in accordance with law, obviously. But why do business need to prioritize privacy compliance? Well, first and foremost, I just mentioned it. There's a number of legal requirements, both in the UK but also overseas, that touch on the details in regards to collecting data, the use of data, and it's a hugely important factor now, not just from a legal perspective, but commercially from the exterior point of view. So consumers are really concerned about how companies are using their data, what they're using it for, and the duration in which that data is being held. It's not just a legal topic, but actually has huge commercial ramifications, both on a consumer level as well. And also, as we mentioned, it's a legal requirement, and breach of the law in this area can lead to huge fines. We've seen it over the years, and we'll get onto that a little bit later on. But yeah, the ramifications for non-compliance and being found to be in contravention of these laws could have huge impacts, both financially and also commercially for businesses.
So why do we see so many pop-ups about cookies and privacy policies, and what's behind these legal requirements?
So basically, as you mentioned, Dan, on the introduction, basically across the world and the globe, a number of local jurisdictions have introduced a number of laws regarding data use and compliance. As we know, it would be great if there was just one law which harmonised the world on all of these topics, but unfortunately not. So as you mentioned, the UK and EU have a GDPR, which we're all fairly familiar with, although there are nuances between the two off the back of Brexit and the UK taking a slightly different approach. California has the CCPA, and then also Canada, for example, albeit fairly close in regards to the US and Canada, they have their own laws. So it just gives you an example of how hard it is for clients, which will be your clients from a commercial space, to comply with data privacy laws, because there's so many different impacts for the business. Data privacy compliance is basically the way in which we I've asked and sort of discussed with businesses and clients in the past is basically procedures internally that are in place to protect user data and the way in which it's managed, and also the safeguards that businesses need to put in place to prevent the misuse and breaches of data privacy compliance laws. They all, on a basic level, outline standard operating procedures and processes that companies must follow. So these are really important things for your clients to bear in mind when, as I said, they're collecting, managing, and sharing personal information. And there can be varying different degrees in terms of that personal information that's collected and used. It can be very basic, just Daniel Shepherd and the name, but actually you can go much more further than that. And the more private information that's held and the sensitivity around that data, typically, not all the time, but typically the data privacy compliance laws and the fines for non-compliance are much more higher. But privacy compliance essentially outlines how organizations can collect, process, and store personal information regardless of the industry. So it's not specific to tech, it's not specific to retail. These laws apply globally. And data privacy laws depend, as I said, and differ upon the geographic location. But this can have huge ramifications, obviously, if a business is operating globally or within a region.
So I think we briefly touched on it, but why is compliance important, not just for the law, but for the business and customer relationships?
Yeah, very, very important. As you said, Dan, we sort of mentioned it or alluded to at the beginning of this this podcast. Essentially, there are huge ramifications from a legal perspective, but it's gone much further than that now. Consumers are really taking time to consider what businesses and what opportunities they should seek out in regards to consumer goods and services, but also at the same time taking into account the potential ramifications, or if businesses or shops, for example, or particular retailers that they typically use have had data breaches. We've seen recently with huge airlines that have just had a huge data breach, which has now had huge ramifications from a consumer's perspective, which ultimately means that consumers will be more concerned and wary about booking flights with said airline. And it really has a knock-on impact on consumer trends and purchasing.
Yeah, I think we've touched upon it on previous episodes. Kind of when data does get breached, the ramifications can be just so huge.
Yeah.
And obviously the business reputation that people can that obviously companies deal with is just immense.
Yeah.
What are some of the big risks of non-compliance?
So some of the risks and non-compliance that we touched upon are ultimately the legal ramifications in terms of fines, again, significantly high. But actually, beyond that, it is that consumer piece. And we've seen in various instances, regardless of the sector that's in question, not just consumer trends, but actually boycotting companies, for example, instance whereby there's been a data breach and it's been so severe that actually the consumers not only are now not wary about booking with the said retailer or the tech company or the airline, whatever sector this is in. As we said earlier, it's not sector specific, but actually full out just saying, okay, I'm not willing to trust this company now. They've misused my data, and ultimately I'm not willing to purchase said items and or services with this business going forward, which again is hugely detrimental.
Now that we kind of understand the basics of the topic, what kind of data do these laws protect, and what challenges do legal teams face in helping companies stay compliant?
Great question, Dan. So yeah, ultimately, again, we're alluding to this, and I think it's really important to specify at this point. Obviously, there's local laws, but also the global and the regional aspect, and the merge of the two. So it's very difficult to navigate. And when you're advising as a future lawyer, commercial lawyer, clients in this space, you need to look at home first. So, for example, if the client's based in the UK, we need to look at the UK laws around data compliance, but also they may have products and services that are sold in various different locations. So therefore, in the UK, for example, some of the protected characteristics, for example, under UK law is sex, religion, age, and so forth. And there's specific laws around those protected characteristics. But actually in different regions, they may all have even more stringent laws. So some of the areas are the most sensitive are age, sex, religion, as we would expect. But actually, it's really important to not only consider them from a UK perspective, a legal perspective, but also navigate the parameters of laws around those specific topics in other jurisdictions if the client, for example, is operating in them.
I guess this kind of nicely leads on to my next question about kind of the role of not only legal teams that are in practice, but also in house.
Mm.
When it comes to writing privacy policies, drafting terms, and
Yep.
designing consent processes, what are their roles?
Great question. Yeah, it's a very hard one actually, purely because the majority of clients will have, even if they don't have huge operations overseas, they will have some instance of transfer of data out of the UK, for example, to the EU and so forth. So even just a subtle nuance between the UK and EU, which is fairly harmonised as opposed to in Asia, for example, the UK to Asia transfers or the UK to the US, there's still nuances. So the role of private practice lawyers and all in-house is always collaboration. So that's really key. Regardless of the topic, I think first and foremost, it's really important to appreciate that. And having had the opportunity to work at private practice and also now in-house, it's even more obvious the reliance and the relationship that you have with OC outside counsel and in-house, and how it's really, really necessary to have a pure collaboration on some of these issues. So the private practice in-house, ultimately, regardless of whatever position or whatever table you're sitting on, it is to guide the business of the client through these very difficult and tricky legal considerations that we've touched upon. When it comes to privacy policies, terms of services, and so forth, we try to, at TikTok, for example, and also when I've been operating for clients in other spaces within the private practice realm, try to harmonize as much as possible. So say, for example, there are nuances between the UK's position and the US's position. Rather than having multiple terms of services that apply, it can become very confusing to a consumer. So say, for example, Dan, you're buying a product or service from a company, but actually you want to find out about the terms of services and the data policies and procedures that they have in place, but you're met with multiple different versions of these terms. It can be extremely overwhelming. And actually, one of the legal requirements in the UK, at least, is to make it quite simplified, so you don't overburden consumers and confuse them, because it is a very confusing topic, regardless, even as a lawyer, let alone as a sort of a consumer. So harmonization and collaboration across as much as possible. And ultimately, there will be nuances where there will be the need for a supplemental. So typically, that's what we've advised clients is. So in the past, where there's been nuances in certain locations, geographically or otherwise, typically we'll have a main body terms of services and data privacy policy, but there might be supplemental terms that apply to that. So we have a basic stand, so everyone knows where they are, for example, in inverted commas. But actually, if you are in California and there's some nuances around that, there'll be additional guidance to consumers around those slight differences in laws.
So it's
The
a lot
supplement,
about trying to promote simplification
yeah,
for the consumer's benefit.
100%. Yeah, 100%. We don't want anyone to be overburdened or over confused by a very tricky topic.
Yeah, I know. Obviously, whenever you look at terms and conditions or data privacy, you can sometimes just see a wall of text and just go, "I don't even want to deal with that." So, also having things in place to make sure that it is as simplified as what's reasonable, I
Definitely.
think that makes a lot of sense. Could you share some of the like trickier areas of privacy compliance? Like, are there
Yeah,
any areas that are kind of you've got to really focus on to make sure you get it right?
definitely, 100%. So, as we touched upon some of those more sensitive categories of data, so sex, religion, age, and so forth, and they're all personal data to the individual concerned. But there's buckets, I like to call them, whereby actually you really have to take time, or additional time, I should say, not time, additional time and care when it comes to certain buckets of areas. Because, for example, under 18, so minors, I'm saying under 18s because that's the age obviously in the UK, but it could be different ages again. This is how you can just see by that one example, just taking one bucket actually. In a different country, it could be under 21s, or it could be under 16s, or it could be under 13s. And the definition of minor, for example, varies. But let's just
Yeah.
take under 18s, for example, or underage individuals. Very, very sensitive, can have huge ramifications from the legal perspective, obviously, which it should do as well, because it's very important for the trust and safety perspective to ensure that individuals that are operating, for example, let's take a social media platform, right? So obviously I'm currently at TikTok. I was previously at Meta on comment for 2 years. So it's something that comes across my desk all the time, and something that both companies respectively take very, very, very importantly in regard to compliance and also ensuring the trust and safety of their users on the platform or platforms. But yeah, that bucket is very important. And then also when there's personalized content and ad targeting. So say, for example, Dan, we mentioned it earlier at the beginning of this pod, you agree to the cookies. Okay, we take that consent. We've obtained that consent validly from yourself, Dan. We now want to personalize content for you and target with ads that be relevant to you, which you've shown an interest in or are willing to buy, for example. So it's a product and or service, or you've shown an interest in that product or service, and then subsequently the assumption is you're looking to purchase a product or service in that area. So under 18s, personalized content and ad targeting, there's some buckets that I would like to call, which have additional data privacy compliances and can be quite tricky to navigate from a legal perspective. So when it comes to advising clients on these areas, it's really important to understand the client's business, what they're trying to achieve, how the product and service works, and ultimately what the end game is, and whether they've had sort of positive or negative experiences in the past, and how hopefully we can sort of work to avoid them in the future, and build on the compliance in those respective areas.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously, you talk about compliance being something that a company needs to focus on.
Yeah.
But when a company's like they may evolve their products or their data strategies and kind of the way that they push the business, how do companies ensure that they are keeping up with compliance during this?
Great point. I think ultimately it's really important, and many businesses actually, to be fair, are very good in this space. Because it's such a sensitive area and people take it very seriously, as they should do. From past experience, okay, when GDPR was first introduced, probably not, but now many businesses are in a position whereby they have regular audits. They go back over their terms of conditions, their privacy policies, to ensure that they're up to date and compliant. There's a real effort and consciousness really to go back and ensure that everything is in place. And where there's been instances or nuances or developments in the law, it's very important to act quickly. That's one of the key things in this area of space. So, and actually, from my job now as a legal in-house counsel, is on myself, but we also have relationships with outside counsel who are working in specific local regions, which obviously I probably wouldn't touch on a day-to-day basis, but actually we'll get flagged and say, hey, Brendan, just to let you know, X, Y, and Z's kicking off, or we expect this to be brought into law within the next 3 to 6 months, just as a flag. And then I can go away, do a little bit more of a deep dive, and then present to the business what this could mean for the product and or services that they're working on now, what's currently launched, and what potentially will be launched in the next 3 to 6 months or further afield. So it's taking audits, looking back, and staying relevant ultimately.
I guess that really nicely puts us into the advanced section and kind of the role of the lawyer, I guess, in this instance, as we've discussed in many other podcasts as well, but kind of being able to look forward and see not only the data compliance, like I think not only internally, but obviously in other jurisdictions, as you've meant.
Yeah.
Are there examples of kind of like government lobbying or policy work to make it more manageable?
Definitely, yeah. A lot goes on behind the scenes, I think, in regards to these areas. I think ultimately, governments in the UK and also around the world, some are very well versed in this area of law, in data in itself, and the developments that data means. Caveat that with the development of AI and how quickly it's moving, but we're actually touching on AI in another pod, so looking forward to discussing that. But actually, in regards to the lobbying I think ultimately lobbying's such a strong word, isn't it? But ultimately it is lobbying. But I think it's basically learnings. How I see it is companies, especially in the tech space. I think let's focus on the tech space here. Obviously, retail as well is important and other areas, but it's specifically in the tech space in regards to data and the use of. I think ultimately, sometimes it can, or the introductions of regulations and laws in this space can be done quite quickly without consultation. And I think there's a real reluctance sometimes to have that collaboration with businesses in the tech space, for example, and also further afield, but in the tech space, in regards to the stifling of business potentially if X was introduced and what that could mean for the business, but also ultimately consumers. So there's nothing worse than a government introducing a new law. Obviously, you have to comply with that law, but actually it has a huge ramifications and knock-on effect to a product and or service, which tens, 15s, hundreds of millions of users are using every single day. And there hasn't been that pre-consultation. Whereas if there had been that pre-consultation with the businesses or the business orgs and groups, there would have been a real cohesive alignment, I think, in regards to what does and could work and the parameters in terms of launching that law and bringing it into law.
I think that's one of the interesting things about topics, especially when we're discussing technology, is kind of the different positions of either people that are maybe in government deciding on these issues and
Yeah,
those that are within this space and kind of. And I think this is kind of a strong point as well. If you're in interviews or assessment centres,
yeah,
is if you're able to look at not only what the firm or the company's currently doing and what the law is around it, but how both of those work together. I think
agreed.
that's where you get a lot of the kind of strength in your answers, is understanding how obviously different kind of players, we'll say players,
Yeah,
kind of operate and what's it, work together, or sometimes against each other, but together to make these laws and kind of make the changes that are seen. And
definitely.
I think it's
Yeah,
not just in this case, but I think in a lot of one, especially when you're looking at tech. When you're
100.
looking at tech, it's one of those big areas where you see people that probably don't know how to open an iPhone
Yeah,
deciding on technology laws, and then
yeah.
those who are way too far ahead don't know how to scale it back, and you're trying to find that middle ground.
Exactly, the happy medium. It's whereby you ultimately want to uphold the law and protect consumers and users of products and services, but at the same time, you don't want to stifle business and you don't want to prevent organizations and companies spending vast investments in local regions and countries and continents around the world by introducing arbitrary laws which just don't work. As you said,
Yeah.
Dan, they just physically do not work. They either are outdated by the time they come in because technology's moved on so quickly, or they just are. There's, as I said, I allude to the fact there's not been that pre-consultation, there's not been that understanding and collaboration with these businesses in this space to understand what the products and services are in order to introduce laws that work within that frame.
And you've just mentioned obviously the rate of technology kind of means that we sometimes maybe lag behind sometimes. But how do trends in technology? So we'll go with AI. It's a favorite on the podcast.
Yeah,
How do they make privacy compliance even more complex?
that is a huge, huge question. Dan. Ultimately, the fast-moving pace. I think realistically, I think that's what it comes down to because it's so hard to legislate against something that is moving so quickly. It's
Mhm.
hard to, and we sometimes bash down lawmakers in terms of, and I think yeah, I'm keen to not do that or to be seen doing that because they've got a very hard job in order
Yeah.
to sort of navigate and introduce laws. And ultimately, what they're trying to do is protect us consumers, right? At the first and foremost. But at the same time, they have a very hard job because they need to introduce laws in this space, but actually it's so fast moving. And as you said, AI is the one that's so fast moving, right? So rewind back a couple of years, we had basic LLM models. Now it's gone through versions. Take Meta, for example. So I was there for 2 years. Just within that 2 year period, just within Meta, the difference and the expansion of AI internally was enormous. You've gone from very basic LLM models to the next minute you've got Meta launching a collaboration with Oakley with glasses, and
Yeah.
you've got footballers. It's just how on earth can you navigate and introduce laws in those areas because it's so quick. So I think, and obviously privacy being the main one there, because it's so important that we get it right, as in we get it right as a business, but also at the same time the lawmakers introduce laws which work, with the businesses, but at the same time, don't stifle these products, very cool products, which consumers want. Ultimately, that consumers want these products. They want to be able to go skiing with Oakley glasses on and take photos and send videos to families and friends and upload onto platforms and so forth. So we don't want to stifle that, but at the same time, it needs to be done in a collaborative way whereby it works.
I think you see every other week kind of a story of some AI
Yes.
getting in trouble for being caught out for doing X, Y, and Z with data. So let's say they'll have with a new update, they'll have said something about a protected characteristic, and
Yeah.
you'll go, how have they let that slip? And then they'll have patched it. So
Yeah.
it's one of those things that you keep seeing them kind of move forward, 2 steps forward, maybe 1 step back, then 2 steps forward. So trying to actually regulate that, especially
It's
around data privacy, is just
impossible, but virtually impossible. Yeah,
yeah.
virtually impossible.
we
Virtually impossible. So
we'd need a 3-hour podcast to even scratch the surface of it.
indeed, and actually, I think ultimately it's hard for businesses because laws are introduced that might not work, but it might then take 6 to 12 to 18 months to basically enter into discussions with the local governments and so forth to maybe make tweaks or adjust or basically learn and explain to them why this doesn't work for their business and why it's stifling X, Y, and Z investments and so forth. But the fines can be big as well. And sometimes the fines are good. And when I say good, I mean there's a reason why the company and organization has been fined. But actually, in many instances, because it's moving so fast, it's very hard for businesses, organizations to stay aware and alive to the fact that these things are changing. And actually, you can end up getting tripped up by sometimes. And we've seen that various instances across data sharing and multiple platforms whereby they've sort of come unstuck a little bit in terms of sort of quite stringent laws around data sharing, data usage, and so forth.
Well, it'll be interesting to see how this market goes. Obviously, it's one of those things where, as everything's becoming more online, and a lot of more things becoming generated by artificial intelligence and stuff like that, data privacy is going to be such a big one to follow. And I imagine that it's going to be a big thing in the future, especially in assessment centres and interviews, where law firms know the value of data privacy, not only for clients but internally. It's you may I think we may have even covered a data breach not too long since from a law firm perspective.
Yeah.
So it's definitely something interesting to keep an eye on.
Definitely 100%. And yeah, to any student that's sort of watching this and going into assessment centres and so forth, I think from a data privacy perspective, as you said, Dan, you set it out very clearly in terms of law firms are taking it very seriously as well. Most law firms or established law firms, especially in the city, for example, have their own data team. It's not now it doesn't fall within commercial. The majority have their own specialised data experts and lawyers that work within this field. Having said that, it's still very important for commercial lawyers and further afield in terms of having an understanding and a grasp of this. But there are experts working in this because it is, as we've touched upon in this pod, such a complex area of law. But it is one thing I'd say, just a final takeaway really, when speaking to clients and when you become a commercial lawyer, if that's what you're looking to do. But even if you're not commercial specific, but you're working within the insurance field or real estate field or whatever that area may be, clients need to get this right ultimately. And if they don't, it will lead to huge fines for them and also reputational damage, which can have a huge impact because it's much harder to regain that back trust. Trust is hard to gain, but it's even harder to regain when it's been lost. So I think that's sort of a final message I'd like to end on, really, just in terms of it is very serious. It's not just about fines. We see the big numbers that are sort of banded around in terms of non-compliance, but it is really important from compliance and also from the initial fine that's subsequently received. But that fine might be 1 billion or 10 million, whatever the figure might be. But the knock-on impact can be considerably higher than that in terms of loss of consumers, loss of buying trends, and so forth.
100%, and it's going to be really interesting to see the way that this story progresses. So thank you so much for joining us today, Brendan, and thank you for everyone listening to today's Commercial Awareness Compass. So remember, Being commercially aware isn't just about following the news, it's about understanding how these developments shape business decisions and legal strategies. Whether you're just starting out or thinking like a commercial advisor, always ask, how does this impact clients and what can a law firm do to help? Join us next week to keep building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic. Thank you.
Cheers.